My name is Mr. Green. I'm 50 years old and I've never been married. Yeah, there are 100 bachelors like me, and one girl almost managed to lead me to marriage. Crazy, right? I grew up as a below average guy, unfortunately. I had no friends at school, let alone a girlfriend. No one would socialize with an ordinary poor dude, let alone date. It was in this kind of lonely state full of personal issues that I finished school. When I entered the first year of college, I immediately started looking for a part-time job to pay for my own expenses. At first, I couldn't find anything good. I spent the first few months looking for it, until one day I found someone's shabby wallet on the street. Inside was a stack of $100 bills. Imagine my fortune. I'd never seen such a sum of money before, and I couldn't believe that I was the lucky one. But a moment later, I felt bad. It wasn't my money. Someone had lost it. Maybe it was someone who really needed it for treatment or something. And so I said to myself, you'll find the owner of the wallet and you'll not have any money, I said to myself, and I began to examine the contents. Inside were some cards, papers with phone numbers and notes. I started calling all the numbers, asking if he had lost something today and what does it look like. After a few calls, I found the owner of the wallet. The man on the other end of the line answered me, giving me an exact description and telling me the exact amount and the contents. We agreed to meet outside a cafe nearby. At the appointed time, I was greeted by a middle-aged man who cheerfully held out his hand and said, "You have been tested." I had no idea what he was talking about. And then what I heard came as a big surprise. You probably heard that rich people have their own quirks. Well, Mr. Cooper was a very wealthy man who owned huge shopping malls. He achieved a lot by his age and no longer knew what to do or where to aim. He and his friends, who were also rich people of the city, invented a trick to throw a purse with money and see who's honest. If the man returned the money, he was honest and on the right track. Mr. Cooper said that there had been many such checks and no one ever called to return the purse, and I was the first. Such honesty he appreciates and invited me to work for him. Can you imagine? I couldn't believe it. It was like a dream. Of course, I immediately accepted without a second thought. I started out as just a trainee, and after working for Mr. Cooper for many years, I became his chief assistant. Over the years, I became like a Sunday. Before he died, he offered me his business after him. As time went on, I grew, made a good amount of money, bought my parents a nice house, and helped my family and friends in every way I could. But now it was time to think about family. I must admit, I had been working all my youth. I had no time to date or meet anybody, so I was inexperienced in matters of the heart, and even had issues with it. It is hard to imagine an older man who hasn't been on a date. But here he is, right in front of you. One day a girl came into our office wanting a job. I happened to see her at the entrance of the elevator. And she smiled at me so sweetly, and I was a little taken aback. Such a beautiful, sweet girl smiling at me. She looked about 25, 26, and she looked very striking and bright. I smiled back and the girl asked what floor the HR department was on. I explained and went on with my business. But the girl's face seemed to loom before my eyes. That's enough. She's younger than you. She came to apply for a job. You might be her future boss, for crying out loud. From then on, I strictly made it my goal not to pay attention to the girl. She was working, and I often saw her in the corridor, in the cafeteria, or in the lift. It was as if fate had brought us together on purpose. One day at our company's birthday party, we got to talking. Sarah, her name, loved the theater, camping, seafood, and even fishing. I was amazed at how much we had in common. She acted at ease. She was able to keep up any topic, and I felt at ease with her. One day I saw Sarah in tears. She was sitting on the corridor crying bitterly. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that her family was having financial problems, and if she didn't solve them, they would be without a house. I immediately wrote her a check and told her it was an unscheduled bonus. Seeing the amount on the check, Sarah was amazed. She hugged me and thanked me happily. From that day on, her attitude towards me changed. I sensed that she was kind of beginning to like me. Days and weeks went on, and one day Sarah sadly told me that she was quitting her job as her contract had expired. But she wasn't too worried, because if she wasn't my employee, I could ask her out. I was taken aback by this boldness, but immediately asked her out. So we started seeing each other, going for walks, going to the movies, and spending all our free time together. And then I made up my mind and proposed. Sarah happily said yes. A million feelings overflowed in my heart. I was so in love and kept saying, "That's the one, that's the one." The wedding preparations were done in the style of Hollywood films of the 90s. The best restaurant in town, hundreds of bouquets of decorations, pop stars, white dress from a famous designer, and a nice menu from the chefs. I wanted to do a wedding my Sarah had dreamed of, and she dreamed of glamour, beauty, and pomp. The day of the wedding came and I put on my dinner jacket. I got a call from my mom saying that she and my dad were stuck in traffic. They were worried that they'd be late of the official part of the wedding. Fixing my bow tie, I quickly went to the priest to warn him and start a little later. As I walked past the bride's room, I couldn't help overhearing Sarah talking on the phone through the ajar door. She was whispering, "Sweet hubby, please don't be jealous. I'll be divorced in a couple of months and back home with the money. Anyway, I don't think it'll go so perfectly. Such a rich old man and so naive as a child." No, he believed I love fishing. Can you believe that? And thought, love, silly old fool. I'll be there and he'll be swimming in money. And she and her friend laughed softly. It seemed to me that time stood still, frozen. I couldn't believe my ears. So it was a lie? A game? All for the sake of getting my money? Abruptly, I opened the door and stood in front of the girls. Sarah was shocked. She hadn't expected me to show up. "Darling, are you here? It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding." I shouted loudly there was no wedding. The wedding was off, and she can run 100 times in that damn dress, but I'm not changing my mind. I took off with my bow tie and threw it on the floor. It pained me to know that people could not love me for who I was, rather my money. The guests were bewildered and quickly left the hall. I invited all the people passing by from the street to taste the treats of the failed wedding. The next day, I bought a train ticket and chose the first city I saw. I listened to the sound of the wheels and stared into the distance. A man with a guitar sat next to me and began to sing a song happily. His cheerful disposition lifted my spirits, and we sang a duet of popular hits of yesteryear. Then a woman, who was about my age, sat next to me and began to sing along too. So the three of us traveled together, singing happily. The train arrived at the terminal. We got out and started to say goodbye. And the woman suggested getting a cup of coffee sometime and maybe get some fresh seafood on the shore. I said, yeah, sure, let's do it. I mean, who knows what could happen? If you liked the video, then please like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe.
My dad named me Reggie, which means a wise ruler, after his uncle. He was the director of a large firm. Yes, as you can see, we have a family business, and all men from the family are good leaders. My dad planned that I would also be able not to ruin the family name and inherit the business after his death. Unfortunately, besides me, there are no more children in the family. I have no mother. She left us, unable to bear my father's temper and long work hours. She wanted to take me with her, as it should be, but my dad did not allow me to lose a direct and only heir of the business. So I have always had a good relationship with him. We support each other in every possible way because it was terribly hard for me without my mom. Dad hired top-notch professional nannies, but of course, none of them replaced my own mother. I was angry with him for taking me away from my mom. Of course I was. At first, I even hated him, and then somehow I got used to it. Now, I don't know where my mom is, but I knew for sure that when I grow up and get married, I will look for a perfect girl to deeply fall in love with and make sure that she loves me back. I didn't want to go through the same divorce like my parents did, because it was terrible. Time has passed. I grew up. My father provided me financially. I had the best private school in the area, with the country's best teachers, but it also cost a lot of money. But as I said, my dad did not spare money on me, especially when it came to education. He believed that it was good to spend money on education, otherwise you can end up living a poor and miserable life. The longing for my mom was no longer the same as before. Although I still loved her in my heart, Dad tried to have affairs with other women, but they were all short-lived. And then I myself began to think about relationships because I was already 16 years old. There were many new teachers in our school that year. Our tutor just changed, and the principal gathered us, introduced us to Miss Steele, our new tutor. You know, when I saw her, I was simply speechless. In front of me stood a young woman, about 25, a tall, skinny brunette with a gorgeous body. She had such a beautiful voice. She was looking at us, sternly examining our facial expressions. Miss Steele later introduced herself and promised that, as a tutor, she would help us with any questions. Yes, I fell for her. And I wasn't alone. I saw how the boys from my class began to discuss her legs, and it kind of pissed me off. On the very first meeting, our tutor held like a team-building exercise. We got to know her, and she, us. We learned that she came from a neighboring state about 3 months ago. It turns out that Mrs. Steele is an orphan. After leaving the orphanage, she made every effort to invest the money she earned into knowledge. She also believed that investing in the brain is the best investment. Later, we saw her other qualities. Despite all the severity and love of discipline, Miss Steele was perfectly able to understand, sympathize, and she was also incredibly responsive. It was such a rare combination of qualities. The male half of the school began to not only like her, but also greatly respect her. She acquired the respect herself without connections or showing off. I realized that I had completely fallen in love with the girl of my dreams. But I had no idea how to hit on her because she was not like everyone else. Then I got the idea to invite her to dinner at our house. And then I got the perfect opportunity to do it. I got sick and I was not at school for several days. Miss Steele got worried and called us home. I introduced myself as a servant and asked her to come home for a meeting in person. She agreed. I was so happy. I told my dad about this and he asked the servant to prepare a special dinner. My father and I put on shirts, suits, and met her. Miss Steele looked adorable in her black blouse and white long tailored skirt. She came to our house and we immediately invited her to sit at the table. I was very nervous, but dinner was great. Her and my father quickly found common ground, so it wasn't boring, only for me sometimes. At the end of the evening, Dad decided to give Miss Steele a ride home, and I began to do my homework since I hadn't done it in the afternoon. The next day at school, my tutor smiled at me and I almost melted. I, again, realized how beautiful she was, that yesterday's dinner obviously did her good, or rather our relationship. And I wanted to invite her again. I came home all elated and saw that my dad was also in high spirits. He was going somewhere, and I asked where he was going. Your Miss Steele and I are going to a restaurant to discuss something about your study plans, he said. I asked why not have dinner at home. But Dad said it was indecent to invite a guest home for the second time in a row. It embarrassed me a little, but I couldn't do anything. I tried asking for it, but he said the conversation was for adults and left. My father arrived quite late. I was asleep at that moment. The next morning, Miss Steele came up to me and told me to say a big hello to my father. It struck me as stupid because they only saw each other a day later. Their meeting was repeated again, and then again and again. I was getting nervous about what could they discuss on so many dinners in a row. And why don't they just initiate me on this topic? Because they are talking about me, right? As soon as I thought about it, the same evening when my father went to her again, I decided to wait for him. At about 2-3 o'clock in the morning, I sat and looked through the window when he arrived. I saw that my father got out of the car and, damn it, he was with her. They got out of the car in an embrace. They were saying something cute to each other and kissed. I was so angry at this moment. How could he do this to me? I didn't speak to my dad for several days. He didn't understand why. And then I learned something worse. My father said that he will soon marry the girl of my dreams. These words almost killed me. I did not want to believe that this was all happening to me. I wanted so badly that the wedding would not take place. I would not be able to look at Miss Steele and perceive her as my stepmother. This was awful. I felt that I should talk to her, tell her about my feelings, and maybe she would refuse my dad? I went to her office and stood right in front of the door. As soon as I was about to knock, I suddenly heard some kind of conversation. Yes, he is totally mine. Yes, he will not refuse. He's crazy about me. Yesterday, he asked to marry me, and I agreed. Soon, the money will be ours, dear. She told someone on the phone. I almost choked in surprise. At that moment, the door opened abruptly, and I fell on the floor. Miss Steele was surprised seeing me, and then switched on an angel mode and began to apologize. She helped me up and said that she was worried about me. I stood there shocked, and then I told her that everything was fine and went home. I told my father about everything. But he did not listen to me. He accused me of lying and said that I was not happy for him. I didn't know what to do. So the next day I went to the police. I showed them a photo and told them about my fears. The police told me that they would soon figure it out. I was waiting. A day later, my father said that the wedding would take place in 2 days. Yes, so soon and so quickly. It would be modest. They will sign, and we'll go to the restaurant, and that's it. On the wedding day, they drove to the church where they had a ceremony, and then they were going to go get a marriage certificate. But I couldn't let that happen, so I faked fainting in the car. My father got scared. He said to stop the car and call an ambulance. I knew that if we were late in the painting, the next opportunity would be next month, so I was acting as best I could for the time being. I saw Miss Steele and freaked out. Frightened, my father listened to my heart and breathing, and when they finally called an ambulance, I kind of came to my senses, saying that I was feeling bad. After making sure everything was fine, Dad wanted to go home, but Steele protested, saying that he needed to sign, and Dad told her that they were already married before God. Like, according to the law, you can sign next month. Steele began to freak out, and in the car while flashing lights drove up to us. The police told Miss Steele to get out of the car with her hands up. At first, she pretended not to understand anything, and then she started running away in the wedding dress. She was quickly arrested. My father was shocked. He did not believe that in her scam right away, but in the end he did. And then he remembered my warnings. It's good that they didn't sign anything. After this incident, my dad began to listen to me more, and he also apologized for a long time for allowing such a situation. But all is well that ends well. If you liked the video, then give it a thumbs up and write us some in the comments. Friends, do not forget to subscribe and also turn the notification bell on to not miss the next video.